Welcome to the Whole Story podcast. This podcast series is focused on inspiring sustainability in agriculture, using the framework of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, also known as the SDGs. Each week, our guests are invited to share their story, highlight a particular one of the 17 goals, and leave us with some practical tips for sustainability on farms. I'm Becks Smith, founder of The Whole Story, a B Corp certified social enterprise inspiring, facilitating, and articulating holistic sustainability in agriculture. And this podcast has been brought to life in partnership with the incredible team at FMG, who are passionate about partnering with organisations like The Whole Story, so together we can support rural New Zealand. So whatever you're doing while listening to this episode, thanks for choosing us. The best way you can support our mahi is to follow and share the show on whatever app you're listening on, and I hope this episode leaves you inspired and excited about the bigger picture of sustainability in agriculture. Today on the Whole Story podcast, I have thoroughly enjoyed sitting down with Cam Henderson, a dairy farmer from Oxford in North Canterbury, director on the Ballance Agri-Nutrients Board, and the Federated Farmers representative on the He Waka Eke Noa partnership. This week's episode is based around UN Sustainable Development Goal 13, climate change, and Cam highlights the work he is doing and has been a part of already in New Zealand's agricultural sector to enable us to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts on New Zealand farmers. Cam brings a mindset of optimism and opportunity to this conversation, whether it be discussing the importance of balance in our sustainability efforts, his learnings from being one of the 13 in the He Waka Eke Noa partnership, or the opportunity for agriculture to change the narrative and instead of dwelling on our role in the climate change problem, take opportunities to be a pivotal part of the solution. So sit back and jump on for the ride. Our last episode of the Whole Story podcast for 2022 is an absolute banger. Welcome along, everybody. Today, joining us on the Whole Story podcast, we have Cam Henderson. So welcome, Cam.
Thanks for having me, Becks.
I guess kicking straight into it, I'd really love for people to hear the story of Cam Henderson.
The story of Cam Henderson was born on a dairy farm up in the Waikato from a multi-generational farming family. I think I'm about the fourth or fifth or sixth generation since we landed in New Zealand many years ago. Spent a long period of my youth out on farm milking cows, moving sheep. We had quite a diverse farming operation up there. I was quite academic at school, and so I bought into the rhetoric that academic people don't go farming, it's a backup career. And so through my own interests, decided to head down an engineering track, and so went off to university and studied robotic engineering and finance. And I've always loved problem solving and the technical side of farming, so picked up those interests in my study and went off overseas for a year travelling and came back, and as many people do, I was flat broke and took the first job that got offered to me, which happened to be at Fonterra. So while I thought I was getting away from farming, actually I didn't go that far at all. Spent a few years at Fonterra in the head office in Auckland as a business analyst, working in business intelligence and sort of data gathering and presentations and that sort of thing. After about 3 or 4 years there, started to look at farming from a business angle and the opportunities of building a business and also the machinery, and also looked at the corporate space and said, look, it's a great space. I love the traveling, I love the environment, but looking 10 years down the track really wasn't what I wanted to do. I enjoyed being out in the land. Quit my corporate job on a Friday and started as a farm assistant down in Canterbury on the Monday, and that was back in 2009, middle of the dairy boom in Canterbury, and built the dairy career from there. So after a few years in Canterbury, managed to convince the family to back me into buying a block of land to convert to dairy, and have been there ever since. So on the farm for 12 years now, and over that time I've gotten involved in a number of different off-farm activities, from young farmers to Federated Farmers to Dairy NZ. Really enjoyed off-farm roles as well, and that led me to being part of He Waka Eke Noa.
Wow, that is quite a journey, and really interesting to hear how you started off thinking that farming was the lowly cousin and the fallback option, to go full circle through corporate back to farming, but actually now with a little bit of industry role as well. So really getting that good balance of practical farming with the sort of corporate career that you enjoyed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the industry has learnt a lot around how to promote itself to young people, and that it's not just about putting cups on cows or shearing sheep or whatever those first year jobs might be. There's a lot more to it. I didn't come at it from milking cows. I still don't like milking cows. I came at it, from the interest in building my own business and being my own boss and being able to help, I guess, promote other people to be able to do what they want to do as well. And I have certainly grown a great interest in the environmental impact as well. So I think there's a number of things that attract people to farming.
Yeah, definitely. And so we like to put people in the hot seat. And I was wondering if you could share with us your funniest story relating to farming or agriculture.
Probably not one specific story, but as much as I love machinery doesn't always love me back. I've had a rather rough history with diggers, actually. I love spending time on diggers, but I got two stories. One, we bought a digger when we started developing the farm. It was an old second-hand digger that did a lot of hours. And one day I started it up, I was driving down the farm, did a few hours, and then Dad came along. He was down visiting, and I put him on the digger and thought, well, you can carry on with that. I need to go and load some bulls. So I was down the road loading the bulls, and my phone kept going off in my pocket. I was too busy to answer it, so I just kept ignoring it. Then a fire engine drove past, and I thought, that's odd, because there's not too many farms down this road. I wonder where that's going. Finished loading the bulls and checked my phone. There was a photo of my digger in flames. My father had he carried on quite diligently on a hot day, and I'd forgotten to check it for bird nests in the morning. So I'd given him this digger, and within 20 minutes of him starting, it had burst into flames, and it burnt the entire thing to the ground. So that machine didn't love me. And then I actually spent a few months over in the US in Georgia developing a farm there. It's a very sandy soils over there, and I was clearing out a creek and had parked the digger on the side of the bank in what I thought was a very dry spot overnight. Came out the next morning, and of course the water sort of re-angled the bank of the stream, and it had eaten away at the bank, and here was the digger lying at the bottom of the stream, half buried. Now this digger wasn't a second-hand one, it was actually a brand new digger. Must have been worth about 160 grand and not insured, that we'd hired. And so within 3 hours, the first 3 hours of this machine even operating, I'd managed to bury it and written the whole thing off. I've learnt to not go near diggers. As much as I love them, they definitely don't love me anymore.
Yeah, perhaps sticking to those days of diggers in the sandpit.
That's right, exactly.
Every little kid's dream to be able to operate a big digger, and you unfortunately are not having the best of luck.
No, not at all, not at all.
So it sounds like you work a lot. Well, I know from my reading and research that you do work a lot in the sustainability space. Now, it's a really big word, and it's become very trendy, and it means a lot of different things to different people. But what I'd really like to hear, Cam, is what sustainability means to you.
So, yeah, sustainability to me is all about balance. And I guess taking the sustainability goals as an example, that you can really work hard on achieving one of those, but arguably, unless you have a consideration of the whole lot, then you're arguably not sustainable because you're imbalanced one way or the other. And I guess farming has probably been through that same path, that we're very production orientated and then very profit orientated. And now it's trying to balance actually what do we want to be doing to ensure that we can achieve many things all at the same time and for a long time. I know myself, I've been on that journey, especially as a young farmer, of production and profitability and trying to make money, and we don't want to not do those things, but if we want to be in this game for a long time, that we do need to balance all the aspects of farming, from people, animals, the planet, environment as well. I don't know if that's something it just takes time to understand how all those aspects interact, but you certainly learn very quickly that if you don't have things in balance, then things can go off the rails pretty quickly. So yeah, to me, sustainability is all about balance.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think of that too. It's like it's a really complicated seesaw, isn't it? And if you don't sort of have all the different pieces balanced, you can very quickly get stuck with one person down on the ground and the other person feet up in the air. It's how we bring that balance into things to make sure that we're actually able to stick around for a decent amount of time anyway.
Absolutely. And I think you bring up the complexity of it, that there are so many aspects and a growing number of aspects to that balance. And you take climate change. Back when I started farming, there was an awareness of climate change and that it was an issue, but not really how it impacted on agriculture or how agriculture impacted on it. And same things with various aspects of animal welfare and bobby calves and staff management. It is getting increasingly complex, and I can see why it's so difficult now for farmers to sort of feel as though they're getting on top of it, because, yeah, the complexity is growing really day by day.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, you touched on the topic of climate change, and you also, in your story about yourself, you discussed your involvement in He Waka Eke Noa. And so I wonder if we could dive into that a bit deeper, and if you could tell us more about your journey into being involved into that climate change narrative of agriculture.
Yeah, sure. I guess over my farming career, having been involved in a number of off-farm roles, climate change had always lingered in the background as a growing issue. I knew agriculture was part of it, but really the regulation hadn't really caught up to us yet. And the industry itself, other than a few sort of management practices that were being promoted, really hadn't taken any sort of lead on climate change and agriculture's role or ability to mitigate it. My involvement with Federated Farmers, I was a president of North Canterbury Federated Farmers for a few years. I had kept in contact with Federated Farmers and their involvement with He Waka Eke Noa, and I guess the opportunity came up to take on the role of representing Federated Farmers as one of the 13 partners in the development of the He Waka Eke Noa set of policies, and that was about 18 months ago. So I jumped at that thinking, well, this is a great chance to have a sizable impact in the industry and bring a farmer's perspective to it, because there was a lot of, levy bodies and scientists and policy people involved, but actually very few on the ground farmers involved in that conversation. I joined the steering group about halfway through its process, and found that a challenging, rewarding, depressing, probably all at the same time experience. And it's been interesting being behind the scenes and I guess how it's kind of played out, the level of politics and science. And it's a substantial challenge for agriculture, but also I think a hidden opportunity if we can get our mindset in the right space with climate change.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And for me, something that really resonated out of that story was the fact that you, as a farmer, could represent farmers in that steering committee, because I think it's so important actually having someone with that practical on-the-ground knowledge actually having a seat at that table.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've seen probably more recently when the farmer voice disappears from that decision making, that we end up with a lot of perverse outcomes, and it just sets the whole process back. I think for good, robust policy making that's going to stand the test of time, that farmers do need to be involved in this conversation the whole way through.
Yeah. And something you skipped over a wee bit in your story about yourself that I'd like to jump back to a bit is you're not only a Kellogg scholar, but also a Nuffield scholar. And both of those research projects are really interesting. So your Kellogg's one on farmer storytelling, I think, is so important. And then also your Nuffield scholarship on farming to carbon zero and agriculture's role in that. I wonder if you could just touch on both of those and give us a bit of background there.
Yeah, sure. You have done some digging. So my Kellogg project was looking at how farmers can tell their story. This is a few years ago now, but it's probably as true now as it was back then. We've been told to tell our story better, and really we're not helped in that. Farmers not necessarily skilled at oratory or doing any fancy video work. Some are, but in general we're not. So how do you tell a story? What's involved? How do we tell the story to, I guess, deliver a certain impact? And so that's what the Kellogg study was about. And so I looked at multiple forms of storytelling, from movies to books to short stories to marketing, and tried to pull together some of the key aspects of it. There wasn't anything, I guess, that was any sort of headline elements that we were missing. It was probably more just encouraging farmers to tell their own story in their own way. There's no right or wrong way of doing it. Everyone's got their own message and own thing that they want to focus on, and to say that's okay too. And you can be honest about your own situation and some of the challenges you're facing, but also to ensure that you've got a positive message. When people go to the movies, they don't want to be left at the end of the movie with a really depressing feel about it. Talk about the challenges, but try and leave your story on a positive note. So I found that very rewarding and a really key insight to the work that I do going forward. And then the other half was the Nuffield Scholarship, which was a fantastic experience. Luckily enough, I was on there pre-COVID, so I was able to travel overseas and looking at farming energy. So I was looking at options of how could agriculture be the solution to climate change in New Zealand, particularly the energy challenge, which we're growing very aware of at the moment, of how we transition our energy system to a more sustainable option, and looking at biocrops, large-scale solar farms, wind farms, biodigesters. And so I travelled through Europe, the US and Brazil, looking at what are the opportunities and technologies that farmers are employing there. And at the time, so back in 2019, it was a very immature discussion in New Zealand, but for anyone that's following that space now, there's huge interest in rural solar farms and distributed generation and some biogas, bioreactors. So it's really pleasing to see that the technology is coming and New Zealand is catching up. But there again, there's a great opportunity there that I think we're missing.
Yeah, I think so. And thank you so much for touching on those, because I think you were very humble and modest in your story that missing those out, because I think they're two really important pieces of the work you've done. And I know from knowing people who have done both Kellogg's and Nuffield that they're no small feat, and it takes a lot of commitment and time to get those projects done. So yeah, well done for that, and thank you for sharing.
You're right, it is. They're incredibly rewarding experiences. I guess it takes you away from your day-to-day life and puts you into that high-level discussion point of, how do we fix some of these big challenges, and to see it for the opportunity that might arise rather than simply as a challenge that we need to deal to.
Yeah, definitely. So the work I do with the whole story, and actually this podcast series in particular, is based around the framework that you've touched on of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And this episode in particular, if people haven't picked up on it already, is focused on goal number 13, which is climate action. And so it's about taking urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. And so I really wanted to dive a little bit further into that goal and discuss the work being done within agriculture, creating progress towards those targets.
Absolutely. It's a huge topic, and there's a number of players operating in this space, and I'm certainly not aware of everything that's going on. There's a lot of money being thrown at it, both from within the industry and from government. But I guess the key aspect that people are probably very aware of is the He Waka Eke Noa program of work that was a collaboration of work between 13 industry partners to present to the government an option for pricing of agricultural emissions. So I guess stepping back a wee bit, most people have probably seen New Zealand's greenhouse gas inventory, where agriculture makes up, according to the current measurement statistics, about 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions. The government back in 2019 wanted to start pricing agricultural emissions as, I guess, a level of equity and mechanism to drive some emissions reductions over time. And the He Waka Eke Noa partnership was a response to that, to say, look, how about we as an industry come up with the best option to do that? And that's really what the 2.5 years worth of work was leading up to May this year. The government's come out with its own response to that proposal, which has caused some angst, rightly so, based on some modelling and their policy recommendations, and that discussion is ongoing. But it's only part, I guess, of a wider program of work around mitigation options and what agriculture can do to help achieve those outcomes. So part of that is mitigation research, and we've got a number of great institutions working on options for emissions reductions. Some of those are probably more short-term, and some of them, the bigger ones, are probably more long-term, particularly relating to methane reduction. But there is a lot of things we can be doing on farm in the meantime around trying to do more with less, essentially. How can we increase our lambing rates so we don't need as many breeding ewes, reduce our number of replacements on dairy farms so we're just not carrying as many head of stock? How can we get more production out of each animal so we just don't need as many? Feeding high quality feeds. There's a lot of things we can be doing now with our farm management options to reduce our emissions profile. It doesn't need to be groundbreaking. It doesn't need to, be cutting 20, 30, 40% of our emissions. Just little accumulations of 0.5% here and 1% there, all add up to make a really big difference. I think despite all the angst that's come out of He Waka Eke Noa, there is a lot of hope too around technology and options available to help us achieve these goals.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to shed some light on that hope and the opportunities that are going on behind the scenes. And I think what's also really interesting perhaps to discuss here is how can agriculture be part of the solution to climate change? Like, what is our role as an industry in actually creating solutions?
Absolutely, and that comes down to mindset change. Like, I've been through the 7 stages of grief, the anger, the denial, my impact on the climate, and have come around to the point of, right, we know there's a problem, let's just get on and make something happen and do what we can to fix it. My hope is that agriculture in general will reach that same point, that the mindset will be, look, where are the opportunities in this space, rather than seeing it as a challenge. So whether it's alternative things that we do with our land, and I know, like, I'm based here in Canterbury, there's been incredible land use change over the last 30 years. And it's not to say that we're not going to see, different options come out that mean that the landscape might look quite different. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think land use change has been painted a little bit negatively over the last few years, and that doesn't necessarily need to be the way. And it could be growing something, it could be building something. There are a number of options that are in development that could hopefully provide a smorgasbord of options for farmers to pick and choose from.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think, as you say, we're seeing a lot of different options for land use change coming at us. And yeah, I think it's about keeping an open mind and thinking about how we might be able to diversify or bring different things into our farming operations to be able to, I guess, face some of these challenges as opportunities.
Absolutely. And I think if you look at climate change and the effect on agriculture, arguably agriculture will be hit first by climate change and will be hit hardest by climate change of all the productive sectors. So if we're looking long term, we should be some of the greatest champions for climate change mitigation, because we're really going to feel some serious impacts if the world as a whole is not able to alter its behaviour and mitigate some of these things. I know that might be a bit of a stretch, but long term, I would love to see agriculture as a champion for climate change mitigation and adaptation, which I guess is the other part that doesn't really get a lot of airtime these days.
Oh, exactly. Because I mean, the climates on our farms may not be suited to what we're doing business in today. We have to be prepared to adapt.
Yes, absolutely.
So, looking at all of the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which one of those do you align with most personally, Cam, and why?
I guess perhaps just through recent activity and jobs that I've been working on, has been climate action. I was listening to your interview with Mike Casey, and he talks about it being one of the existential threats, that if we can't fix climate change, then really nothing else matters, because it speaks to our existence on this planet and to biodiversity's existence on this planet. So it's really something we need to focus on. But you don't want to focus on that to the detriment of all the others. And so it comes back to that balance element of, look, my key work is in climate action, but I'm very aware of what it means in the space of climate action on farms, that we don't want to go and shut down all of our pastoral agriculture to combat climate change, because then we end up with the goal number 2 around zero hunger, and we're going to make that a lot worse, and potentially good health and well-being in number 3 and a number of others as well. So yeah, I'm very focused on number 13, but very focused on how we deal with climate action and how it might impact the other 16 goals around it.
Yeah, and I think it's really important creating an industry or a sector that has strength of people working in all of those balanced areas, because we can't be everything to everyone, but we have to hope that there are strong people leading in all of those facets to ensure we maintain that balance within our sector.
Absolutely. There is a symbiotic relationship there, that if we can tackle some of the challenges around clean energy in number 7 and good education and gender equality, I mean, all of these goals actually go towards mitigating climate change in the long term. Healthier water, healthy on the land, it's all helping towards mitigate climate action. Mitigating climate action can have an effect on all the other 16, and all the other 16 can have an effect on climate action as well. So yeah, it's a good reminder to not sort of zero in too much on one and forget the others.
Yeah, they're definitely all connected, that's for sure. So I guess you're a big champion of this, and so I'd love to hear your perspective on it, flipping the script and turning challenges into opportunities. So what do you see as the biggest challenge to New Zealand's agricultural sector regarding sustainability, and how are you turning that into an opportunity?
The immediate one is around climate action. I do keep coming back to it just because of, I guess, the placing that sits in our society's hierarchy at the moment in policy setting and environmental concern. But I've been involved in water quality policy here in Canterbury as well, which in a few years will become front of mind again. I mean, it's environmental action, I think, for agriculture is its greatest challenge, followed very closely by its impact on animals and people. But I think within that, we've got a phenomenal ability to problem solve in the industry. And if you look back at a number of the challenging points in our history where, when there's been a problem in front of us, we've managed to find a way through it. If you look at back in the 80s, it was a very depressing time. I was a child through that period, but my parents have reminded me of how difficult it was and that there wasn't a future for it, essentially. That was the general view, but we've found a way through and have made it even more successful than it was, pre those 1980s periods. So, I think that sometimes we do need tough but achievable challenge or target put in front of us to really make us innovate and change the way that we act. We've seen again and again that actually we've become better farmers for it, more profitable, more sustainable, better for people and planet, all at the same time. So once you get over potentially some of the initial angst and initial reaction, emotional reaction to some of these changes and targets, that we have a phenomenal ability to adapt and to make it work for us and to be better for it ultimately. So I kind of rely on that. I see examples of that all the time.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I guess it's nice to hear that although there's a bit of angst around and it's a little bit uncertain still at the moment, waiting for feedback, but setting those challenges that are tough but achievable. And so, we can do tough things. We've done it before, we'll do it again. We just need the challenge set that is, as you say, tough but achievable.
Absolutely, and we've got an entire industry built around it. Our collaborative and cooperative nature within New Zealand in agriculture means that we're not competing with ourselves on this, and arguably we've got a lot to learn from what's happening internationally as well. But there's a great community of knowledge and sharing and science and funding that understand how important this is. People may not agree, but all political parties understand how important this is to New Zealand, not just agriculture, but to New Zealand to solve this problem. So I think people can take heart that as an individual business owner, not in this alone, and it's not just you and your neighbours. There is an entire community of very smart people working on this problem. The options will come, and I guess it's just up to us to pick them up and run with them.
Yeah, and I guess that's actually a really interesting point, and I'd love to hear your insight on this as well, is, talking about that collaborative nature. I mean, how unique was it to be part of that He Waka Eke Noa steering committee where you had 13 partners together sitting around trying to focus on a common problem?
Yeah, I mean, it was groundbreaking, really. We've never, the industry's never done that in its past. Arguably, there was a lot of criticism that the various partners worked against each other, particularly in environmental policy, that there would be a particular law change and each of the partners would jump in there with their own people and argue their own case. And as farmers, we might have been paying levy or membership to most of them and seeing it as being quite a destructive process. So I don't know whether you want to give the government credence for putting us all in the room and saying, right, you sort it out. Arguably, it'd be great if we got this opportunity again, any upcoming policy issues, to say, look, how about we sit down as a team and try and come up with our own solution. It wasn't easy at all. There was a lot of, I guess, understanding or listening going on in the early stages to understand where each partner was coming from, what they saw as important, and to learn from each other. But it's amazing looking back and watching how that happened and how you build a team, I guess, between the 13 partners to say, look, it's not about us versus them within the partnership, it's us versus the problem. And that really helped, I guess, develop the set of policies that we came to in the end. My hope is that we would get this opportunity again. I know that it's been a rough ride for everyone that's been involved, but I think the outcome is better for it than just setting a whole lot of policy buffs to work to come up with the solutions. Anyone that's listening that's involved in these processes, I think for all the pain that it's brought, I think it's still ultimately delivered the best outcome.
Yeah, I think so. And I do really appreciate the hard work that was put in by that partnership, because good governance around tough challenges is never easy. And the fact that we had all the partners in the room trying to solve a common problem, despite it being a tough process, that actually the sector is better for it as a result. And I would like to see this repeated with other issues as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, this being the first time, there's been a lot of learnings. One of the key ones, I think, is the partnership really struggled to bring farmers along with them, that we were all in the tent and kind of closed the tent door and had our own discussions. And then it was a real surprise to farmers when we came out with our own proposals. And that was a real key learning, that we were so focused on discussing things with each other that we didn't bring farmers with us. So if we were to do this again, the whole process would need to be much more open and transparent, and there shouldn't be any surprises at all at any stage of the process.
And I think that's wonderful. And, there's always things we can learn from our experiences. And as you say, it was groundbreaking and a first. So, yeah, we can only learn and grow as we face these challenges. So, touching on that, what's next on the cards for the next 12 months for Cam Henderson?
So, I do wear a number of other hats. So I'm a Ballance Nutrients Director, and I'm really keen to champion the great work and innovation that company is doing on mitigation technologies, as all of our cooperatives are. There's the cooperatives themselves are phenomenal vehicles for commercialising some of the R&D that's coming out of our universities. So it's really exciting to see some of that work come through. Here in Canterbury, as all regions are, that there is a substantial plan change process coming up, predominantly water quality, but I guess all environmental issues at regional council level. So there's a bit of preparation to go on there. And I'm also part of a local land care group here that's got its own trials and work underway to mitigate the effects of particularly dairy farming, but just intensive land use on the environment. So, yeah, really exciting. There's there's kind of a national level work and then sort of really localised work to try and find solutions. It's all very exciting.
That definitely sounds like a busy 12 months ahead of you, and with a young family in tow as well, and a farm on the side.
Oh, yeah, no, we're suckers for punishment in farming.
We sure are. So I like to leave people back down at the ground level with this podcast. And I was wondering if you could share with us, Cam, one practical take-home action that farming businesses can take to contribute to their sustainability story.
I can really only speak to my own experience and I guess the things that have helped me. And the key one for me is taking a longer term view. I think having started in farming, you start to think, week to week, month to month, you're just trying to survive to get to the next stage. That view expands a little bit as the business evolves, and you might take sort of a yearly or 2 yearly view. I think when you talk about sustainability, quite often some of the actions you take quite often don't have a payback over some of those short-term periods that we consider. And so when you're looking at investing in solar panels or forestry or retiring some land or changing stock classes or investing in a certain sort of genetics, often the payoff could be 5-10 years in the making. And so I guess my change in mindset came from looking at things more long-term. And I think farmers are actually, ultimately, when you stand back, good at that. We farm for multi-generational benefit. We're proud of our systems. We do farm for our kids and for their kids. And sometimes we just need to be reminded of that when we're making our business decisions and investment decisions, that this is a long-term game. And so I guess key advice would be just lift your horizon, look long-term. You don't want to forget about the short-term decisions, but don't focus on those solely and forget about the long-term impact of what you are doing. Because ultimately, when we're on our deathbeds, that's not going to matter, how much milk production we made in a certain year. It's going to be that legacy of the long-term gradual work that we've done on our farms and what we've built that'll make us most proud at that stage in life. So, yeah, just take a longer-term view.
Plant seeds for trees whose shade we will never sit under.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it is. It's a really beautiful point, and it does actually, enable you to shift that perspective. So thank you so much for sharing that, Cam. And I want to take the time now to thank you very much for your generosity today with your knowledge, your experience, your thoughts on climate change, and our role as an agricultural sector and actually being part of that climate change solution, because I think it's really important, as you touch on, to see the opportunity in this. And so your optimism in that has been really appreciated. So thank you so much, Cam.
Yeah, not a problem.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Whole Story podcast. We really hope you enjoyed it and are feeling inspired and optimistic about putting sustainability into practice on farm. I have one last request for you before you go. Make sure, whatever platform you're listening to us on, that you hit follow and share the show or episodes with your friends, so that together we can grow our community and inspire sustainability in agriculture in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And thanks again to FMG for partnering with The Whole Story, so that we could bring this podcast to life for you all to enjoy. Catch you next time.